Okay, welcome to Chapter 34, Population and Community Ecology. All right, so let's start with what ecology is. Now, this is a branch of biology where scientists study how organisms interact with one another and within their physical environment. So this means animals, how certain animals and other organisms interact with one another, and how they respond and react to the physical environment. All right, so non-living factors. There's different branches of ecology. Today we're going to talk about population ecology and community ecology. So remember, a population is a group of the same species, okay, and they have to be in the same area. And of course, they interact with one another. They interact with their environment as well. And when population ecologists study just the population and how they interact with one another and their environment. Now, a community is going to be all of the populations within a particular area. And community ecology is going to study how those organisms interact with different organisms in their area, in their ecosystem. So if we look at the levels of ecology, there's individual ecology where they study just the organism itself. Okay, so in this case, it's this fish, or a population, which is a school of fish. The community is going to be those fish and others, other fish. Those guys, these guys over here, not to mention the, okay, these guys too, coral, which are technically alive. Then ecosystem ecology is on a greater scale. Okay, they take into account non-living factors, ecosystem ecology. This is just a closer look at the coral reef and the different coral that's there, along with the organisms that live within the coral reef. So studying a population is not very easy, but it's doable, and it has been done for a long time. So every single population has a pattern of growth, and a population can change in size. And looking into it, we can examine something called biotic potential. So this is the highest possible per capita rate of increase for a population. So the greatest rate of increase of growth for that population. So things that can affect their growth rate is going to be reproduction, the potential of reproduction remember, reproduction is going to add to the population, how much food they have, and if there's disease present, whether it's present or absent is a factor. And what about predators? Okay, so predators are going to directly affect a population's ability to grow. All right, so biotic means alive, so these are living factors that influence a population's growth. What type of growth can a population have? All right, so there's a couple of growth models we're going to look at. The first is called exponential growth. Now, exponential growth is when there are no biotic or abiotic limitations, unlimited resources. So in other words, the population is just growing continually. Okay, and it'll keep growing. All right, and it makes on a graph, it'll make a J curve. A J curve is exponential growth. Now, in real life, that is not possible to grow exponentially indefinitely. It's just not possible because there are resistance, and there's also something called a carrying capacity. So in real life, what happens is there's growth, and then it will be exponential, and then it will shift to logistic growth because a population will reach its carrying capacity right there. Okay, so what does that mean? The carrying capacity is the number of individuals in a population that can be sustained in that environment without destroying the environment. So initially, a population, again, will grow exponentially, right? There's the exponential growth. But then in a real population, it will shift from exponential to logistic growth. And this is logistic growth in red. And this is exponential growth in black. And one second, let me just erase the rest of that. All right, there we go. Exponential growth in black makes a J curve, and logistic growth makes an S curve. So populations typically grow exponentially and then shift into logistic growth because they've reached their carrying capacity and they stop growing, they stabilize. And if you look at this graph, it looks like an S, and so we call this an S curve. Logistic growth is the S curve. All right, there's other curves that are looked at. So this is called the survivorship curve. It represents the lifespan of an organism. So some organisms die quickly. They don't live a long time. Okay, so that would be, in our example here, let's say they start at 1,000, right? And they drop drastically, and they don't live past a certain age. So basically, they don't live very long, and they're going to make this particular curve. Okay, now some have a pretty consistent life, so they don't have a curve at all. It's just a straight line. Okay, and then some organisms like humans, they have a long survivorship, and that's because we tend to live to a long age. Okay. And really that's the end of that. There's no real reason to complicate it any further. All right, now there's other growth patterns. So we talked about exponential growth, the carrying capacity that shifts everything to logistic growth. And then the next pattern of growth we're going to talk about is called a boom and bust cycle. Now, some organisms, this is how they exist in a boom and bust cycle. So let's look at the first graph. Always look at the X and Y axes. The X axis is showing a year span over a month, in months, January through December, and then the population density. And what we're looking at are these photosynthetic bacteria, and this is how they exist. They live with a low population throughout most of the year. Then they get favorable temperatures. It gets hotter, and there's this boom in their population density, and then they grow exponentially, and then they will, because there's so many of them, they're going to deplete their nutrients, and the temperature will start to drop, and then they bust, and then the rest of the time they live, there's a small density, they just go on. And they repeat the same thing the next year. Stay low, June, July comes around, they boom, and then right afterwards they bust, and it goes on and on and on. Look at the next figure. These, in figure B, what we're looking at is the boom and bust cycle of the lemming population in the Canadian Arctic. These are lemmings. Okay, and this research has been going on for quite a bit of time, and basically what they found is that over 3 or 4 years there's a boom and bust cycle. So you see this spike here, high population density, and then it crashes. Then high population density, and then it crashes. then it increases and crashes. Typical boom and bust cycle. So why does that happen to the lemmings? Well, there's a couple of reasons. These guys are easy targets for prey. So when they have a high population density and there's a whole bunch of these guys and they're taking up physical space, they're an easy target for a predator. And the other thing that they do is when there's many of them and they have this, they're overpopulated, they start to do something weird. They jump into the ocean. Okay, so they jump in there thinking that they're going to swim away and, you know, find somewhere else to live, and they don't make it. They drown. And they just never learn. They just keep doing this over and over and over again. And so that is a typical boom and bust cycle. Okay, next. Now, studying animal population growth patterns is very important because what it allows us to do is also take into account the human population growth pattern. And now this is, you've seen this before, but we're going to look at it again. Okay, now let's look at the graph carefully. The x-axis is goes back to 12,000 BC, and then it kind of wraps around to 2011. Okay, and then it's measuring in billions of people from 0 billion to 7 billion, and then this data again goes back to 2011, but it's still applicable. Now, if you look closely, see, we have our human population. Oh, and then the other thing, of course, is we're looking at technological advances. Agricultural advances were pretty major, and then the Industrial Revolution and medical advances. So the population is pretty steady, and it's pretty low. It starts, you see a little bump in there. It increases. It increases because of our agricultural advances. So people started to domesticate crops and animals and started farming, and that changed things because there was more food. Then goes on, and you see it increasing, and then there's this dip. Big dip. I mean, this wiped out. This is the bubonic plague. This is on the map. It literally is on the charts because it was so significant. It wiped out like half the population on the planet. Now, what saved us, what changed everything, was the medical advancements that we have found. We've had the discovery of antibiotics, so bacterial infections are treatable. We have had, of course, vaccines for the measles, mumps, whooping cough, and these terrible, terrible diseases that were wiping out humanity. And so literally medical advances have saved human life. And that's a fact. It's indisputable, because ever since then, what has happened? The human population has grown exponentially, and it's still growing. And this is now a new problem because we are overpopulated. Okay, so unfortunately, you know, there is a sad story here. Now, the less developed countries tend to have a higher population, and there's reasons for that. You know, it's basically because they don't have access to contraceptives and things like that. You know, there's other political reasons, but that we won't get into. And more developed countries tend to maintain their population. So basically, in other words, more developed countries are having less children. Less developed countries are having significantly more children. All right, so we can actually look at population distribution patterns and see a perfect pattern. So in rapidly growing population, so let's look at this graph. Now it's split into female on one side, male on this side, and 0, the age, these are ages, of course, and 0 is obviously birth. Okay, so what this is saying is that people in a rapidly growing population, they have an average of anywhere from 6 to 8 children. Okay, and that's both girls and boys equally. And then we can follow this around, and actually it makes a perfect triangle. Pyramid, triangle, whatever you want to call it. The fact is it makes this triangle. Okay. So, and what's highlighted here is these primary reproductive ages, which is typical across the board. Now, in a slow growing population, that means that people are having 3 children, around 3. Okay, so 2 to replace the parents. Remember, to make a baby, you need 2 people. So 2 to replace the parents plus 1 more to add to the population. That is a slow growing population. And if you look at the sides, they are relatively straight. And that's how you identify this graph. This is a slow growing population. Okay, in Europe, there is a decreasing population, which means that couples are having 1 child. So they're not reproducing even enough to replace themselves. Because that would take 2 people or 2 children. And in a graph with a decreasing population, you'll see this tapered neck. So it's tapered, meaning that there's a narrow neck right there, and then it goes out. Okay, so think of it like a bottle, upside down bottle. Okay, now these patterns are important because that is how you will recognize these. A rapidly growing population makes a triangle shape. A slow growing population has straight edges. And a decreasing population is tapered down here at the birth age and the toddler age. Okay, the next topic is community ecology. Now remember, a community is all of the populations in that area and how they interact with one another. So this picture is showing quite a bit. So it's showing a lot is going on. So there is a lioness and there's her prey. Okay, and of course we're looking at some scavengers back here. Okay, and we're looking at a competitor. Okay, so there's a lot happening. All right, so the interaction between these animals and the plants also is community ecology. Studying that is community ecology. So there's different types of interactions, but before we get into that, let me define a couple of things. So really quick, this is an important term, a niche. Some people pronounce it niche. I call it a niche because I think that it sounds better, but that's just my opinion. So a niche is very unique. Okay, so this is what it is. It's more than just a physical habitat. So animals occupy a niche, but it's more than just the physical space they occupy. A niche is the environment that is preferable to them, nesting and denning sites, the types of food they eat, okay, how they eat, and the water that they need, and other species that it has to compete with. So all of these together make up a niche. Now here's the rule. No 2 species can ever occupy the exact same niche. There has to be something that's slightly different, or one species will always wipe out the other, and that's the rules. And that's the way the world works. Okay, so there have been studies done to demonstrate that this is accurate, and this is called the Gaussian competitive exclusion principle, and it's named after this Russian scientist that did this study, and it was pretty impressive. So what he did was he took two different paramecium. So see how it says P. aurelia precaudatum, or P. caudatum. P stands for paramecium, and that's their genus, and this is their species. So they grew them separately in a different flask. So remember, a flask is, okay, so he grew them. These guys are pretty small, so they can live in a flask no problem. Okay, grew them separately. Provided all the nutrients and food that they needed, and that's that. They grew just fine. They actually grew perfect. They grew exponentially. They reached their carrying capacity. They shipped to logistic growth. Normal. Same thing with these guys. Normal. He put them in the same flask, and what happens is that at some point, hey, right there, one species dies out completely while the other succeeds, because no two species can ever occupy the same niche. One species will always outcompete the other, leading it to extinction. This is called interspecific competition. Okay, so we're going to look at different types of interspecific interactions. Of course, there's competition, predation, parasitism, mutualism, competition. Now, here it's showing, this is a great table to look at and study. It shows the type of interaction, the effect on species A, species B, so these are non-specific. If there's ever competition, it's going to harm both species. If there's predation, obviously the predator is going to benefit and the prey will be harmed. Parasitism, the parasite benefits, the host will be harmed. Mutualism, they both benefit. All right, so let's look at a couple of interactions. So interspecific competition, it happens when populations of two different species compete for the same limited resources. Okay, now the key word here is different species, and see the negative sign is indicating that this is negative and harmful to both. And we're looking at a lion and its common foe, the hyena, and they are negatively impacted by one another. All right, so animals compete for everything from food, water. Plants will compete for light because they need light for photosynthesis. Intraspecific competition is when there's competition between populations of the same species. They compete for resources, and this is the most fierce competition on the planet. Because why? Because these animals are equipped with the same exact tools, right? They have these like these two lions. We don't know who's going to win this fight because they are born with the same weapons, right? The same kind of anatomy, the same teeth and claws and agility and that sort of thing. Therefore, it is the most fierce competition there is. Intraspecific. Predation. Predation is pretty interesting. In fact, all right, now here's the thing. This is obvious. Predators, predation is when a predator kills and eats a prey, and the predator is going to benefit, the prey is going to suffer. Now, here's the interesting part, is that predators have adapted these acute senses. They've adapted physical and chemical adaptations, claws, teeth, fangs, stingers, poison, to help catch and subdue their prey. They're fast and agile. Now, at the same time, the prey, they have evolved and are evolving to match their predator in getting away. For example, so as these guys evolved and became faster and faster, and so did their prey. They became better at detecting predators, and they've become very quick. And you know, this one's interesting. This is a porcupine, and you see this little guy, he's coming over here, and he's kind of not sure what to do with it. He's considering touching it, but he's a little nervous. And if he does, he's going to learn very quickly to stay away from these guys. So as predators have evolved, so have prey, and this is called predator-prey coevolution, because they co-evolve. Predator-prey relationships typically demonstrate a boom and bust pattern, and that's an important fact. I'm going to add that here. Okay, this is a boom and bust cycle. Okay, that's a typical cycle, and what we're looking at here is the snow hare and the lynx. This is an old study that goes back into, you know, actually goes back into the 1850s. But the fact is this: if a predator eliminates its prey, for let's say this lynx just, you know, wipes out the snow hare, then what? Well, they're going to suffer. So if you look at the graph, okay, the snow hare is in this purple color, the lynx is in blue. So right now at this point, you see the snow hare is relatively high, and the lynx is going to grow. As there are more and more and more lynx, they're going to eliminate their food source. Okay, and if they eat these guys into near extinction, what's going to happen to them? Same thing. Right afterwards, right after they wipe out these rabbits, they're going to go into near extinction as well. And then the rabbit will recover. And as the hare recovers, so will the lynx population. And then, but if it gets too high, when the lynx gets too high, the same thing will happen again. They eliminate the hare, and they are eliminated in turn. Not completely, obviously. There's, you know, got to be a handful that survive to repopulate. So this is a typical boom and bust cycle, and actually predator-prey relationships are typically will fall under the boom and bust cycle. So what do prey do to defend themselves? Okay, so remember I said that predators, agility, and all of the things that they've evolved in turn have led to prey evolving. This is coevolution. Now, so one species adapts in response to the pressure that is imposed upon the other, imposed upon them by the other species. And typically the predator puts pressure on the prey, so they start evolving. And what they've evolved is pretty interesting. So here's a couple of pictures of some things that I haven't explained yet, but I will do. All right, so ultimately this is what predators lead in prey coevolution leads to. So it's going to lead to some prey populations. They're going to adapt passive defenses. For example, plants will develop thorns and spines. Some organisms will develop toxins, and then they'll develop these colors, cryptic coloration. Okay, so I'll explain what that means. Okay, so there's also active defenses, defensive fighting, escaping. Okay, cryptic coloration, there's a couple of things. Camouflage, for example. If you look at this picture here, can you see the animal? It's pretty hard to see. It's a frog right there. Closely you'll see him. Okay, and he's camouflaged completely into that tree. This is the monarch butterfly. They have evolved these a chemical defense. If anything comes near them, they'll release their defenses. Okay, so camouflage is a direct result of predator-prey coevolution, and here's a couple of interesting ones. So this is the leafy sea dragon right here, and it's actually an animal, but it looks like a leaf. So its defense is to blend in with the shrubbery, to not be eaten by bigger fish. Thorns are typical defenses for trees. Okay, these are cacti that have evolved to look like rocks. Okay, there they are. This is a camouflage lizard. This is a particular type of fish. And so this is the sand dab fish. And there he is on one pattern of or coloration of rocks, and then they move it to a different color and it will camouflage right into the rocks. And this is the snow leopard. So the snow leopard changes its colors when the snow is gone. Seasonal. Other predator-prey coevolutionary tactics. So plants will do this. They will evolve to taste bad, and that's one tactic. They also, some organisms will sting, and some organisms evolve something called mimicry. Mimicry is when a harmless organism has evolved to mimic and look like a dangerous organism. For example, this is the bee. Everybody knows the bee, and bees are venomous. And this guy is a completely harmless hoverfly, but they have evolved to look like or mimic the bee as a defense mechanism. So animals will leave them alone. So organisms will leave them alone because they look like the bee. Okay, these are two types of snakes. This one is venomous. This is not venomous. And they have evolved the pattern of venomous snakes. Okay, now there's other tactics. Startle coloration. So this is the fall-side frog. This is its back. See its little feet? This is its back, and it has false eyes. Okay, right there and there. Why would it have something like that? Okay, so it has these. They're not really eyes. They look like eyes, and the reason they have them is because the eyes are big. Therefore, indicating they look like they're a big animal to other animals, and so they resemble a much larger animal when in fact they're not. Okay, that's one. Warning coloration. So we saw this guy earlier. See these colors? These colors are a threat. They're a warning. These brightly colored patterns tell other animals that I have chemical defenses. That's what those colors are about. And some organisms will evolve those colors to, they may have chemical defenses. Some of them don't. This guy does. And warning coloration is a pretty interesting defense, and it's a direct result of predator-prey coevolution. Okay, this is more startle coloration. This is a peacock, a moth, a peacock moth. And it actually has these big eyes here, and it looks like an owl from far away. This isn't the best picture of it, but it is not an owl. These are markings right here, make it look big. Okay, this is a caterpillar, and what does it look like? Looks like a snake. Okay, next, parasitism. Parasitism is very simple. We have small parasites, large parasites. Small parasites are endoparasites. These are heartworms, HAV, viruses, bacteria, anything that infects inside the host. Large ectoparasites are like leeches or lampreys. Of course, these will devastate a population. They can destroy. They can have mild effects to death. They can affect They can affect the actual population density, or they can reduce the population's ability to reproduce. Commensalism is very interesting. This is actually where one organism benefits and the other is neutral. Nothing is happening to them. So this is very typical cattle. These little birds, they sit on top of the cattle and they actually just pick insects off of them. So these birds benefit and the cattle's not harmed at all, so no big deal. A lot of plants do this, like orchids. They will grow and wrap around a tree branch to get more sunlight, and it doesn't hurt the tree. And that's commensalism, where one will benefit. So here the orchid will benefit, the actual tree will not be harmed. Same thing, those birds will benefit, the cattle's not harmed, and that's commensalism. Okay, that is the end of this chapter, and good luck.